Captain Marcus Cole had been flying through the black emptiness of space for 3 long weeks, and his body ached for solid ground beneath his feet. His ship, a battered freighter called the Persistent, groaned and creaked as it approached Relay Station Keth 9, and Marcus could feel every vibration through the worn pilot seat that had molded itself to his shape over 15 years of hauling cargo across the outer verge. The station appeared on his view screen like a spinning metal flower, its docking arms extending outward into the void, and Marcus let out a tired breath as he guided his ship toward berth 17. He needed fuel, he needed food, and he needed at least 8 hours of sleep before he could even think about his next job. The docking clamps grabbed the Persistent with a heavy thunk, and Marcus powered down the main engines before pushing himself up from his chair. His knees popped and his back protested, but he ignored the complaints of his 42-year-old body and made his way to the airlock. The station's interior smelled like recycled air and alien spices, a combination that Marcus had grown used to over his years among the stars. Keth 9 was run by the Velthari, an insectoid species that valued efficiency and profit above all else, and Marcus had learned long ago to keep his interactions with them short and businesslike. He found the fuel depot on the station's lower ring and approached the terminal where a Velthari station master stood behind a gleaming counter. The creature's compound eyes reflected Marcus in 1,000 tiny images, and its mandibles clicked in what passed for a greeting among its kind. "Human vessel designation Persistent," the Velthari said in a buzzing voice that the translator in Marcus's ear converted to flat monotone words. "You require refueling services." "That's right," Marcus replied, sliding his credit chip across the counter. "Fill her up with standard plasma blend and charge me for a 20-hour berth." The Velthari took his chip and processed the transaction with mechanical precision, and within minutes, Marcus received confirmation that the fueling process had begun. He decided to find something to eat while his ship drank its fill, so he wandered through the station's commercial district until he found a food stall that served something humans could actually digest. The meal was bland but filling, and Marcus ate slowly while watching the various alien species move past him in a river of strange shapes and colors. An hour later, his communicator buzzed with an alert from his ship. Marcus frowned and checked the message, expecting to see a notification that fueling was complete. Instead, the screen displayed an error code he had never seen before. "Fuel intake rejected," the message read, "System cycling retry in progress." Marcus abandoned his half-finished meal and hurried back to the docking berth, his boots clanging against the metal floor as he picked up speed. When he reached the Persistent, he found the Velthari station master waiting for him with 2 security drones hovering at its shoulders. "Your vessel has rejected 3 consecutive fuel deliveries," the Velthari announced, its mandibles clicking with obvious irritation. "This is a waste of station resources and my valuable time." "That's impossible," Marcus said, brushing past the alien to reach his ship's external control panel. "My intake systems were fine when I docked." He ran a diagnostic from the panel, and the results came back clean. Everything showed green, everything read normal, but when he tried to initiate another fuel transfer, the system rejected it again. "Your human equipment is clearly faulty," the Velthari said with a dismissive wave of one chitinous arm. "I am adding an impound fee to your account for every hour this berth remains occupied by your non-functional vessel." "Just give me some time to figure this out," Marcus said through gritted teeth. "There has to be a reason." "There is a reason," the Velthari replied. "The reason is human incompetence and inferior engineering." Marcus wanted to argue, but he knew it would accomplish nothing. The Velthari turned and walked away with its security drones trailing behind, and Marcus was left alone with his broken ship and his growing frustration. He boarded the Persistent and went straight to the engineering bay, pulling up every schematic and diagnostic tool he had available. Nothing made sense. The intake valves were functioning perfectly, the fuel lines were clear, the filters were clean, and yet something was blocking the fuel from entering his ship. Marcus ran his hands through his graying hair and stared at the screens until his eyes burned. Then he did what he had always done when technology failed him. He grabbed his toolkit, opened the access hatch in the floor, and climbed down into the crawlspace beneath the main deck. The space was cramped and dark, filled with pipes and cables and the humming machinery that kept his ship alive. Marcus switched on his handheld light and began working his way toward the fuel reservoir, checking every connection and every seal as he went. The Persistent was an old ship, built 30 years ago in the orbital shipyards above Earth, and she had her quirks and her secrets. Marcus knew every inch of her, every scratch and dent, every repair he had made over the years. That was why he noticed immediately when something was wrong. There was a shape beneath the fuel reservoir that did not belong there. Marcus stopped moving and held his breath, aiming his light at the shadowy space between the tank and the hull. At first he thought it might be a buildup of some kind, a clump of debris or a nest of cable rats that had somehow gotten aboard. But then the shape moved. Marcus felt his heart slam against his ribs as he watched the thing uncurl slightly, revealing a body that seemed to be made of living glass. It was a creature unlike anything he had ever seen, small and translucent with veins of soft amber light pulsing beneath its skin. The thing was wrapped around the fuel intake valve like a protective parent cradling a child, and Marcus suddenly understood why his ship had been rejecting fuel. This creature was blocking it. His hand moved instinctively toward the wrench at his belt, but he stopped himself before his fingers could close around it. The creature was trembling. In the harsh beam of his flashlight, Marcus could see dark marks along its membrane, burns and scars that spoke of pain and desperation. This thing was not attacking his ship. It was hiding. It was afraid. Marcus lowered his light slightly so the beam would not blind the creature, and he sat back against a support beam to think. He could kill it, that would be easy enough, or he could call station security and let them deal with it. That was what any sensible pilot would do. But Marcus had never been particularly sensible, and something about the way the creature curled tighter at his presence made his chest ache with a feeling he could not name. "Hey there," he said softly, keeping his voice low and calm. "What are you doing in my ship, little one?" The creature's amber veins pulsed faster for a moment, and then slowly, very slowly, they began to calm. Marcus did not move. He just sat there in the darkness beneath his fuel tank, watching a frightened alien creature that had somehow found its way into his home among the stars. And he made a decision that would change everything. Marcus stayed in the crawlspace for a long time, watching the creature and letting it watch him back. He could see now that it was no bigger than a house cat, though its body was shaped more like a jellyfish that had learned to survive on land. Its translucent skin rippled with each breath it took, and the amber light that flowed through its veins seemed to pulse in a rhythm that reminded Marcus of a heartbeat. The burns on its body were worse than he had first thought, and some of them looked fresh, while others had begun to heal in uneven patterns. "You have been through something terrible," Marcus said quietly, not really expecting the creature to understand him but feeling the need to speak anyway. "How did you end up in my ship?" The creature did not answer, of course, but it did seem to relax slightly at the sound of his voice. Its grip on the fuel intake valve loosened just a little, and Marcus took that as a good sign. He thought about the route he had traveled over the past 3 weeks, all the stations and outposts where he had stopped to deliver cargo or pick up new jobs. The creature could have slipped aboard at any of those places, hiding in the shadows and crawling through the gaps between panels until it found this warm space beneath the fuel reservoir. But why was it blocking the fuel? Marcus pulled out his portable scanner and aimed it at the intake valve, being careful not to startle the creature with any sudden movements. The readings told him what he needed to know. The station was pumping standard plasma fuel with an ionized compound mixed in, a common additive that made the fuel burn hotter and more efficiently. Most ships used it without any problems, and most species could tolerate it without harm. But the creature's body chemistry was different. The scanner showed traces of the compound on the creature's burns, and Marcus realized with a cold feeling in his stomach that this substance was poison to the little stowaway. It had wrapped itself around the valve not to sabotage his ship, but to protect itself from the toxic fuel that would flood the reservoir and fill the crawlspace with deadly fumes. "You are not trying to hurt me," Marcus said with wonder in his voice. "You are trying to survive." The creature's veins pulsed brighter for a moment, almost as if it understood. Marcus thought about his options. He could remove the creature by force and let the station pump his ship full of the cheap fuel that everyone used. The creature would probably die, but that was not really his problem. He was just a freight hauler trying to make a living, and he did not have time or money to spend on a strange alien that had decided to make its home in his engine compartment. But even as these practical thoughts crossed his mind, he knew he could not do it. There was something in the way the creature trembled, something in the desperate grip it kept on that valve, that spoke to a part of Marcus he had almost forgotten existed. He had been alone for so long, traveling from star to star with nothing but his ship and his cargo for company. He had stopped letting himself care about things that did not directly affect his survival. But this little creature had come to him for help, even if it did not know how to ask. "All right," Marcus said with a sigh that carried more emotion than he intended. "I am going to figure this out, and I am not going to let you die in my ship." He climbed back up through the access hatch and made his way to the communication terminal in his cabin. His fingers moved across the controls as he searched through old contacts and half-forgotten connections, looking for someone who might be able to help. 3 hours later, he had found what he needed. There was a fuel dealer on the far side of the station, a Grothian smuggler who specialized in hard-to-find supplies for ships that preferred to stay off official records. The fuel he sold was an older blend, pure plasma without any of the ionized additives that the station used. It was expensive, and it was technically illegal to use in compact-regulated space, but it would not poison the creature hiding under Marcus's fuel tank. Marcus spent almost half of his remaining credits to buy enough of the old fuel to get him to the next system, and he arranged for it to be delivered to his berth in unmarked containers. While he waited for the delivery, he sat at his computer terminal and began searching through the galactic database for anything that might tell him what kind of creature he was dealing with. It took him hours of digging through obscure files and forgotten records, but eventually he found a match. The creature was called a Lithon, and it came from a dying world at the edge of known space. The database entry was old and marked for deletion, but Marcus read it with growing fascination. The Lithon had once been important, the file explained, serving as living filters for the ancient starships that crossed the galaxy before modern technology made them unnecessary. They lived in symbiosis with their ships, cleaning the fuel and purifying the air in exchange for shelter and warmth. But when better technology came along, the Lithon were abandoned. The species that had depended on them simply moved on to cheaper and more efficient solutions, leaving the Lithon to fend for themselves in a galaxy that no longer had any use for them. Most of them died. The few that survived became stowaways and scavengers, hiding in the forgotten corners of old ships and trying to avoid the attention of species that considered them pests to be exterminated. The Galactic Compact had classified them as non-sentient nuisance fauna, which meant they had no rights and no protections under interstellar law. Anyone who found a Lithon could kill it or sell it or do whatever they wanted with it, and no one would care. Marcus read that last part 3 times, and each time it made him angrier. He thought about the creature trembling in his crawlspace, the way it had responded to his voice, the way its light had pulsed with something that looked very much like hope when he had spoken gently to it. "Non-sentient," Marcus muttered to himself. "They have no idea what they are talking about." The fuel delivery arrived late that night, and Marcus hauled the heavy containers into his ship one by one until his arms ached and his back screamed for mercy. He disconnected from the station's fuel lines and manually pumped the pure plasma into his reservoir, watching the flow meters carefully to make sure everything went smoothly. When the first rush of clean fuel passed through the intake valve, Marcus felt the ship shudder slightly. He hurried down to the crawlspace and aimed his light at the creature, worried that something had gone wrong. But the Lithon was not trembling anymore. It had released its grip on the valve and was now hovering near the reservoir wall, its amber veins pulsing in a slow and steady rhythm that looked almost peaceful. The creature turned its translucent body toward Marcus, and for a moment their eyes met across the narrow space. "You are welcome," Marcus said softly. The Lithon pulsed once, bright and warm, and Marcus smiled for the first time in longer than he could remember. "I am going to call you Flicker," he said, "and I am going to take you home." Finding the Lithon homeworld was not going to be easy, and Marcus knew it from the moment he started looking. The database entries were scattered across dozens of different archives, most of them corrupted or incomplete, and the coordinates he found kept contradicting each other in ways that made his head hurt. But Marcus had always been stubborn, and once he set his mind to something, he did not give up easily. He spent 3 days in his berth at Keth 9, ignoring the increasingly angry messages from the Velthari station master about his overdue fees, while he pieced together fragments of information like a puzzle with half the pieces missing. Flicker stayed in the crawlspace during this time, but Marcus noticed that the creature had begun to move around more freely. It would drift through the gaps between panels and appear in unexpected places, its amber glow casting soft light in the dark corners of the ship. Sometimes Marcus would look up from his research and find Flicker hovering near his shoulder, watching the screens with what seemed like genuine curiosity. "You want to know what I am doing," Marcus said during one of these moments. "I am trying to find your people, little one." Flicker pulsed gently in response, and Marcus could have sworn he saw something like gratitude in the patterns of light that moved through its translucent body. The more he learned about the Lithon, the angrier he became at the galaxy that had abandoned them. These creatures had served faithfully for thousands of years, keeping ships running and crews alive, and their reward for all that service was extinction. The species that had used them most heavily, a long-dead empire called the Ythrani, had simply discarded them when newer technology became available. They did not relocate the Lithon to safe habitats or help them adapt to new ways of living. They just left them behind, like broken tools that no longer had any value. "We humans have done terrible things too," Marcus admitted to Flicker one night as he worked through another batch of corrupted files. "We have destroyed and abandoned and forgotten, and we are not innocent of the sins that other species have committed." Flicker drifted closer, its light dimming slightly as if it could sense the sadness in his words. "But I like to think we are capable of being better," Marcus continued. "I like to think that sometimes we can choose to do the right thing even when it costs us something." On the 4th day, he finally found what he was looking for. The Lithon homeworld was called Lithar, and it was located in a region of space that the Galactic Compact had designated as a restricted zone. These zones were systems that had been deemed economically worthless, places where the resources had been depleted, or the conditions were too harsh for profitable exploitation. The Compact did not maintain any presence in these areas, and travel to them was discouraged through a complicated web of regulations and permit requirements. Lithar orbited a dying red star that had begun to cool centuries ago, and the planet itself was mostly frozen now. But the database mentioned geothermal vents beneath the surface, places where heat still rose from the planet's core and life might still be possible. If any Lithon had survived, that was where they would be. Marcus calculated the route and felt his stomach drop at the numbers on his screen. The journey would take him through 3 separate restricted zones, past patrol boundaries and monitoring stations that would flag his ship the moment he entered their reign. He would need more fuel than he had, more credits than he had, and more luck than he had ever possessed in his entire life. But he had made a promise to Flicker, and Marcus Cole did not break his promises. He sold everything he could spare from his cargo hold, taking a loss on goods he had planned to deliver to clients who would now have to wait. He called in favors from old friends and former crewmates, people he had not spoken to in years, and asked them for help without explaining why. Most of them said no, but a few came through with small contributions that added up to something meaningful. One woman, a mechanic named Sarah who had served with Marcus on his first ship 20 years ago, sent him a message along with her credits. "I do not know what you are doing," she wrote, "but I know you, and I know you would not ask unless it mattered." Marcus read her words 3 times and felt something warm spread through his chest. He had spent so long convincing himself that he was alone in the universe, that no one cared what happened to him or what he did with his life. But here was proof that he had been wrong. On the morning of the 5th day, Marcus finally undocked from Keth 9 and pointed the Persistent toward the outer reaches of known space. The Velthari station master sent him a furious message about unpaid fees and threatened to report him to the compact authorities, but Marcus deleted it without reading past the first line. He had bigger problems to worry about now. The first jump went smoothly, and Marcus allowed himself a moment of hope as his ship emerged from hyperspace in a quiet system far from any major travel routes. Flicker had moved up to the cockpit for the first time, hovering near the viewport and watching the stars with an intensity that made Marcus smile. "Beautiful, is it not?" he said. "I have been traveling through space for most of my adult life, and I still get amazed by it sometimes." Flicker pulsed in response, and the colors in its body shifted to include shades of blue and purple that Marcus had not seen before. It was almost like the creature was expressing wonder. They traveled for 6 days, jumping from system to system and avoiding the main shipping lanes where patrol vessels might spot them. Marcus learned to read Flicker's moods through the patterns of its light, and he found himself talking to the creature more and more as the journey continued. He told Flicker about his childhood on Earth, about the mother who had raised him alone, and the dreams of adventure that had pulled him away from everything he knew. He talked about the years he had spent building his career, the friends he had made and lost, the mistakes that still haunted him in the quiet hours of the night. Flicker listened to all of it, pulsing softly in the darkness of the cockpit, and Marcus realized that he had not felt this connected to another living being in a very long time. On the 7th day, everything changed. Marcus woke to the sound of his ship's alarm blaring through the cabin, and he scrambled to the cockpit to find a message waiting on his communication screen. It was from a Corvus vessel that had been tracking him for the past 2 days, and the words it contained made his blood run cold. "Human pilot Marcus Cole," the message read, "you are harboring undocumented biological cargo classified as salvageable property under Compact Regulation 774. Marcus stared at the screen and felt his hands begin to shake. "Prepare to be boarded for inspection and collection," the message continued. "Resistance will result in the forfeiture of your vessel and criminal prosecution." In the crawlspace below, Flicker's light had dimmed to almost nothing, and Marcus could feel the creature's fear radiating through the ship like a physical force. Someone had found out about Flicker, and now they were coming to take it away. The Corvette vessel was sleek and fast, a corporate enforcement ship designed to chase down smugglers and salvage any cargo worth taking. Marcus watched it grow larger on his view screen and felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on his shoulders. He could surrender Flicker and save himself, or he could run and risk losing everything. The decision should have been difficult, but somehow it was not. "Hold on, little one," Marcus said as he grabbed the controls and pushed the Persistent into a hard turn that made the old ship groan in protest. "We are not giving up without a fight." The Corvette vessel responded immediately, adjusting its course to follow him and sending another message demanding his compliance. Marcus ignored it and focused on the navigation charts, searching for anything that might give him an advantage. There was an asteroid field nearby, a dense cluster of rocks that most pilots avoided because of the danger they posed to ships trying to pass through. Most pilots were not desperate enough to try it, but Marcus had run out of better options. He dove into the field at full speed, weaving between massive boulders and spinning chunks of ice, while his collision alarms screamed warnings that he did not have time to acknowledge. The Corvette ship followed him in, but its pilot was more cautious, slowing down to navigate the obstacles that Marcus was barely avoiding through luck and instinct. "Come on, old girl," Marcus whispered to his ship. "Show them what you can do." The Persistent responded like she always did, absorbing the abuse and somehow holding together despite every logical reason why she should fall apart. Marcus had bought her cheap from a junkyard 15 years ago, and everyone had told him he was crazy to think he could make her spaceworthy again. But he had seen something in her that others had missed, a stubborn refusal to quit that matched his own. Now she was repaying his faith with everything she had. They emerged from the asteroid field with only minor damage, and Marcus immediately plotted a course to the nearest jump point. But the Corvette ship was still behind him, closing the distance with engines far more powerful than anything the Persistent could match. "Warning," his computer announced in its flat mechanical voice. "Fuel reserves at 32% and declining." Marcus cursed under his breath and checked the numbers, knowing even before he saw them that they were not good. He had burned through too much fuel dodging through the asteroid field, and now he did not have enough left to reach Lithar. He was going to fall short, and the Corvette would catch him, and Flicker would be taken away to some laboratory where scientists would cut it open to see how it worked. "No," Marcus said aloud, refusing to accept what the numbers were telling him. "There has to be another way." As if in answer to his words, something strange began to happen. The fuel gauge on his console flickered and then started to climb, ticking upward by fractions of a percent that should have been impossible. Marcus stared at it in confusion for a long moment before he understood what was happening. Flicker had moved to the fuel reservoir and was doing something that Marcus could not explain. The creature was filtering the plasma, separating out impurities and recycling waste products back into usable fuel with an efficiency that no human technology could match. The Lithon had evolved to do this for thousands of years, serving the ancient ships of the Ythrani Empire, and now Flicker was using that same gift to keep the Persistent running when she should have been dead in space. "You amazing little creature," Marcus breathed as he watched his fuel reserves stabilize and then begin to grow. The Corvette ship was still gaining on them, but now Marcus had a chance. He pushed his engines harder than he had ever pushed them before, trusting Flicker to keep the fuel flowing, while he focused on putting distance between them and their pursuers. They jumped to hyperspace with the Corvette vessel less than a minute behind them, and Marcus felt his heart pounding in his chest as he waited to see if they had made it. The stars stretched into lines around them, and then they were through, emerging in a new system with no sign of the corporate ship on their sensors. "We lost them," Marcus said with a laugh that came out shaky and relieved. "We actually lost them." Flicker drifted up from the engineering section and hovered near him, its light pulsing in a rapid pattern that Marcus had learned to recognize as excitement. He reached out without thinking and let his fingers brush against the creature's translucent skin, feeling a warmth that spread through his hand and up his arm like gentle fire. "We make a good team," he said softly. But their troubles were not over yet. The Corvith had resources and connections that Marcus could only imagine, and they would not give up just because he had escaped them once. Over the next 3 days, Marcus had to change course 7 times to avoid patrol ships that seemed to know exactly where he was going. Someone was feeding them information, tracking his movements through the network of contacts he had used to plan his route. One by one, the people who had helped him were being questioned and pressured, and Marcus knew it was only a matter of time before the Corvith closed the net around him. He started taking risks that would have terrified him a week ago, jumping through unstable lanes and cutting through systems that were not even supposed to be navigable. Each time, Flicker kept his fuel burning clean and his engines running smooth, and each time Marcus felt more certain that he had made the right choice in helping this creature. They were no longer just a pilot and a stowaway traveling together. They had become something more, partners bound by danger and trust, and a shared determination to reach a goal that seemed more impossible with every passing hour. On the evening of the 10th day since leaving Keth-9, Marcus received a message from an anonymous source. "The Corvith Collection Officer has filed a formal claim with the Compact," the message read. "All vessels in the sector have been ordered to detain you on site." Marcus deleted the message and looked at Flicker, who was hovering near the viewport and watching the stars with its usual quiet intensity. "They really want you," he said. "I have to admit, I am starting to wonder what makes you so valuable." Flicker turned toward him and pulsed in a complex pattern that Marcus could not interpret. But there was something in the creature's light that looked almost like determination, a fierce little glow that reminded Marcus of his own stubborn refusal to quit when the odds were against him. "All right," Marcus said with a grim smile. "If they want a chase, we will give them one they will never forget." He set a course for the final jump that would take them into the restricted zone where Lithar waited, and he pushed his engines to their limit, while Flicker worked its magic in the fuel reservoir below. Behind them, the galaxy was closing in. Ahead of them, a frozen world orbited a dying star. And somewhere between those 2 points, Marcus Cole had to find a way to deliver one small creature home to a family it had never known. Lithar appeared on the viewscreen like a pale blue marble floating in the darkness, its surface covered in ice that reflected the dim red light of its dying star. Marcus had never seen anything so beautiful or so sad in all his years of traveling through space. He guided the Persistent into orbit and stared down at the frozen world, trying to imagine what it must have looked like when it was still alive with warmth and water, and the gentle glow of a million Lithon moving through its oceans. Flicker pressed against the viewport, its entire body pulsing with colors that Marcus had never seen before. There was joy there, and longing, and something that looked very much like hope. "We made it," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotions he could not name. "We actually made it." The ship's sensors detected faint heat signatures deep beneath the ice, concentrated around geothermal vents that still pumped warmth from the planet's core. Life had survived here against all odds, clinging to existence in the darkness, while the universe forgot it existed. Marcus brought his ship down through the thin atmosphere and landed on a frozen plain near one of the larger heat signatures. The ice groaned beneath the weight of the Persistent, but it held firm as the landing struts settled into place. He suited up in his environmental gear and opened the cargo bay doors, letting the cold air of Lithar rush into his ship like a ghost returning home. Flicker did not wait for permission. The creature flowed out of the ship and moved across the ice with a speed and grace that Marcus had never seen from it before. It knew where to go, guided by instincts that had been coded into its kind for millions of years, and Marcus followed as best he could while his boots crunched through the frozen surface. They reached a crack in the ice where steam rose from the depths below, and Flicker dove through without hesitation. Marcus knelt at the edge and peered down into darkness that was broken only by the faint amber glow of his small friend, descending into the unknown. He waited there for what felt like hours, his suit protecting him from the cold while his heart raced with worry. What if he had been wrong about this place? What if there was nothing left of the Lithon but bones and memories? Then the light began to rise. At first Marcus thought it was Flicker returning alone, but the glow was too bright, too vast to be a single creature. He stepped back from the crack as dozens of shapes emerged from the depths, each one pulsing with the same amber light that he had come to know so well. The Lithon had survived. They rose around him like stars being born, filling the air with their gentle radiance, while patterns of light danced between them in a language that Marcus could not understand but could feel in his very bones. And there in the middle of them was Flicker, surrounded by its people for the first time in who knew how long. Marcus watched the reunion with tears freezing on his cheeks inside his helmet, and he thought about all the choices that had led him to this moment. He had given up credits and cargo and safety, risked his ship and his freedom and his life, all for a creature that the galaxy had declared worthless. And now, standing in the cold light of a dying star, he knew that he would make the same choice again without hesitation. One of the Lithons separated from the group and drifted toward him, larger and older than the others with veins of deep gold running through its translucent body. It stopped in front of Marcus and pulsed in a slow, deliberate pattern that seemed to carry meaning beyond mere light. His suit's translator crackled with static and then produced words that sounded strange and ancient. "You carried our child across the darkness," the voice said, each word formed from the chemical signals that the creature was releasing into the air around them. "You gave when there was nothing to gain." Marcus swallowed hard and tried to think of something worthy to say in response. "Someone had to help," he managed finally, "and I was there." The elder Lithon pulsed again, and Marcus got the impression that it was considering his words carefully. "We have watched your species from afar," it said. "Humans are young and loud and often foolish." Marcus almost laughed at the accuracy of that description. "But you are also capable of things that older species have forgotten," the elder continued. "You still feel the pull of compassion even when it serves no purpose, and you still act on it even when the cost is high." "I just did what seemed right," Marcus said. "Yes," the elder replied. "That is precisely what makes your kind so remarkable." It pulsed once more, and then turned to the gathered Lithon, communicating something in their language of light that made all of them glow brighter for a moment. When it turned back to Marcus, another shape had joined it. This one was small, even smaller than Flicker had been when Marcus first found it. A young Lithon with veins of pale silver that pulsed with nervous energy. "This one wishes to travel," the elder said. "It has felt the call of distant stars since it first emerged from its budding, and it asks if you will carry it as you carried the one you call Flicker." Marcus stared at the little creature and felt his heart expand in his chest. "You want to come with me?" he asked. The young Lithon pulsed once in a pattern that he somehow understood perfectly. "Yes." Marcus knelt down so that he was closer to its level and held out his hand. The creature drifted forward and settled against his palm, warm and light, and full of possibilities that Marcus could not begin to imagine. "I would be honored to have you aboard," he said. He looked up and saw Flicker watching from among its people, its amber glow steady and content in a way that it had never been during their journey together. "Thank you, Flicker," Marcus said, "for trusting me." and for showing me that I still had something worth giving. Flicker pulsed in response, bright and warm, and full of something that looked very much like love. Marcus carried his new companion back to the Persistent and climbed aboard, pausing at the door to look one last time at the frozen world and the creatures that had made it their home. Then he sealed the hatch and made his way to the cockpit, where the young Lithon had already found a spot near the fuel reservoir. "I am going to call you Ember," Marcus said as he powered up the engines, "and we are going to have one hell of an adventure together." The ship lifted off from the ice and rose through the thin atmosphere, leaving Lithar behind as it climbed toward the stars. Somewhere in the galaxy, a Corvith Collection officer was filing reports about a human pilot who had defied the law for reasons that made no logical sense. Somewhere else, the story of what Marcus had done was spreading through the networks and channels where humans talked to each other about the things that mattered. And somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, other humans were beginning to wonder if maybe they could make a difference too. Not because it was profitable or practical or smart, but because someone had to. And they were there. Marcus Cole flew his battered freighter into the black emptiness of space, with a small creature glowing beneath his fuel tank, and he smiled at a future that suddenly seemed full of light. The galaxy did not understand humans, and perhaps it never would. But that was perfectly fine with Marcus. Understanding had never been the point. The point was that kindness existed, and compassion endured, and sometimes one stubborn pilot with a broken ship could change everything just by choosing to care. That was enough. That would always be enough.